Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Superman and Lois, Season 3, Episode 3. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. It's a pretty heavy episode all around with just everything that's going on. First and foremost, we have Clark's nightmares. That is just like, right, he's waking up and he has to race to get Lois. And it seemed like the first nightmare, it seemed like he got there fast enough, but it seems like the second time around he wasn't. And that's just, obviously it's a personification of, hey, I can't do anything for Lois. Like, how do I know? Like, he feels like, because this is the one situation where he can't do anything about it. Last episode, I talked about it. This is a situation Superman can't punch his way out of. He can't protect his family. How can he protect Lois from something he can't help her with? Even Kryptonian technology can't help Lois' current circumstances. So it's like, well, what do I do in that regard? Because, you know, it just feels like when Lois, for him, it's like when Lois needs me the most, I can't be there for her, and I want to be, and I think a lot of that is kind of obviously driving a lot of Clark's, like, hey, you need to go to your appointments, but Lois is avoiding them because for her, it becomes too real. It's something that she's dealing with all the time, and just, especially when she kind of really breaks it down later on when she's talking to Clark, it's like, the fact of the matter is, I'm the one that has to go through that chemo treatment. I'm going to have all this all this put in my body. I'm going to lose my hair. My body's going to become frailer, and she's feel like I'm going to lose me. That's why she's so adamant about this Bruno thing, because it's easier to focus on something else rather than your circumstances, because at first she's like, no, I forgot about the appointment. Okay, I'm rescheduling. And the second time around, it just became overwhelming because she was hearing everything, and it made it real, and you could feel it. I think for her, it felt like it was just such a suffocating situation. And she legitimately, she's scared anyone would be in that situation. And I think the reason why this storyline hits, hard, because it's a very somber and heartbreaking storyline, because once again, it's not like this is something unique to Lois. It's like, it's not like it's kryptonite poisoning like Ryan Wilder had to deal with in like season 2 of Batwoman. This is just straight up regular cancer that could happen to anyone, and it blindsided her, And it's just like, that's because it's so real. It just can happen to literally anyone, and it has happened to other people, and that's what really makes it real. And then also, I'm also coming from the perspective of my mom's got medical issues. Like, obviously, I don't really get too much of my personal life, and I'd rather not dive too deeply into it. But I think that's also where it plays a role into it, because it's like, yes, my mom's had medical issues for a while now, but things have really gotten, rough for her a little bit in the past couple months, and having to be there firsthand for a lot of that. Whereas the other stuff, it's there in the back of my mind, but I didn't have to kind of see some of that firsthand, didn't have firsthand knowledge about some of the stuff she's going through. Now I do. So it changes things a lot, I'm not trying to equate, but I think it's just like, that's why it's hitting even harder. Like Lois being a mother, my own mom going through her medical stuff right now. I think that's why it just kind of, it's like the timing is just wild. And it's just, and when it makes it feel so heavy, and that's the point, because it is such a heavy thing. Once again, it's like, yeah, Superman being one of the most powerful beings on this planet, you still can't do anything about it. You're just like every other human who just, all you can do is pray and hope that everything works out, that, Lois makes it through, because you're not just saying that to Lois to keep her spirits up. You're also saying that to yourself, because you feel like you have to believe it, because you feel like if you let go of that belief at any point in time, like, you have to keep your hope up, and especially means a lot coming from Superman, whose whole thing is about inspiring hope in people. So, but like I said, Lois is, especially too, like the opening was like, that was the opening to the episode, was Clark's nightmare, but Lois and Clark talking to everyone important to them, Chrissy, Lana, Kyle, and Sarah, Nat, and John Henry Irons, and Sam telling them all that, and even her calling up her sister Lucy to let her know, like letting all the people that are so important to them know about this, and just everyone like trying to what's it's a heavy thing, and it is still that thing of and especially with the way Lois put it later on of, yes, you want to be there for me, yes, Clark, but I'm still the one that has to do it. And it's like, yes, this is something hard that you have to do, Lois, but that's why we have to be together as a team going through this together, because I want you to know you're not alone. And especially the ending being beautiful the way it is, where everyone that cares about her is there. Like, you know, her dad, Nat, John Henry Irons, Jordan, Jonathan, and, you know, all of them being there for her to remind her, you're not in this alone. We love you. We are here for you. We're praying for you. Like, you know, we've got your back during this whole situation. So, but, especially when her and Chrissy find themselves in a terrible situation this episode. They got stuck inside of a freezer where they couldn't get out because the signal for Superman wasn't making its way through. And I even love how that kind of all comes full circle, especially the nightmare sequence, because Clark, like later on when like she hits the button, well, Chrissy had hit the button and she calls out the Superman, and just like when you see those speed waves on him when he's pushing himself to go even faster to get her. But it's like, yeah, it's a situation where because she is a little reckless with this, because she's so adamant because Chrissy was like, hey, these people have guns. We don't know when they're going to come back. Like, I saw them kind of pack stuff up, but it's like, hey, maybe there's some evidence here. And Lois, because once again, it's easier to focus on this investigation rather than her own health. And it puts Chrissy in this complicated spot, because now it's like, hey, I don't want Superman mad at me. It makes me an accomplice. Like, I love and care about you, Lois. I don't want you missing your treatments, because every day you're not getting your treatment is a potential situation of you getting worse. And because also even Jonathan and Jordan, when they were talking to Nat and Sarah about it, it's like everyone responds to chemo differently. Obviously, the more it goes on, the worse it's going to get. But it's like no one knows what these early days are going to be like, especially for Lois. So it's just once again, it's a lot, you know. And obviously Sam, understandably, is kind of jumping down Clark's throat, because it's like, whoa, you let her miss the appointment. Yeah, who cares if there's like, you know, it's like, right. Clark he's not trying to, like, it's a fine line, because he doesn't want to push Lois too hard, because he wants to be that supportive partner in this regard. But it is one of those things of, well, sometimes you might have to be a little more aggressive with it. He's being like, Lois, like, you need to do this. Like, we need to go to your appointment, you know? And, you know, later on, it's like, right, he was off dealing with a mudslide situation, was in Nepal. And by the time he got back, Lois was gone. And Sam's like, why would you leave her there alone? And it's like, if Clark was there, maybe he could have, like, been there and held her hand through that. He will later on, but it's still, there's just so much happening all at once. And obviously, speaking on that side of things, you have John Henry Irons, like, having a because, like, right, he talks to Sarah. I mean, he talks to Lana about it, where Lana's like, oh, it must be hard seeing, you know, Lois go through this, considering, you know, right, she's this world's version of your wife. But it's like, yeah, but she's not my wife. He's brushing it off. And later on, Nat wants to she wants to help Jonathan and Jordan give their mom a gift, one that she can't return, like make it something that says like, hey, we're here by your side. And that is a watch that Nat helped make. Well, Nat was the main one behind it, and she got her dad's help with it. But John was kind of like, what? No, but she's not your mom. It's like, yeah, but still, like, I think mom's watch would be kind of a nice gift. And he's just kind of, yeah, do whatever you want. It's your watch. But he was acting like that because regardless of what he's saying, he even admits later on, it's just like Lois was kind of deflecting with everything, so is he. Because he thought like, hey, as long as I was saying it didn't bother me that she wasn't your mom, it would be okay. But it's like, no. And when I thought she was in danger, it made me remember, she's my friend, and I do care about her, and I worry about her. She might not be your mom, but there is going to be a little mixture of, this woman looks exactly like your mom. I know what happened to your mom. I already lost her. Now Lois is in a situation where she's sick and she could die. Like, of course that's going to, like, even if you can separate it a little bit in your brain, it's still a thing of like, yeah, that's still there to some extent, but it's mainly like, hey, this is a friend of mine that's sick and I'm worried about her. And, you know, Nat is too. Because it's like, right, I recognize she's not mom, but she is someone I've come to care about because she's come to, you know, look after me and you. So But circling back to the situation in the Bruno investigation, it turns out that there's like all these blood packs, and they Sam and the DOD ran the DNA, and it turns out it's Clark's blood. So first and foremost, you're like, how do you have like that many vials of like Superman's blood? I was about to say, like, I don't think Clark would, because I was about to say, like, Clark probably wouldn't, like, the government, he probably wouldn't be too keen on the government having any amount of his blood, but that much blood, like, there's no way. So I can only assume they took some strands of DNA and replicated his blood or whatever, because I'm like, how else would you get that much of Superman's blood? Like, even if you were to compound it over the years, like, that still wouldn't make any sense. Like, it has to be a thing of, you got a little bit and you kind of replicated it. So it seems like that's how they're giving people superpowers. I guess it's almost like the XK last season, when it's like, oh, it gives people power. So I guess they're kind of implementing that and basically forcing Superman's cells in his blood to basically replicate his powers. And basically it's too much for a normal human's constitution to have, because they basically have to force it down your throat. It's like someone, you know, kind of like he did when he beat Allie. It's like, hey, I had all this energy that she's trying to absorb, but it was too much for her to handle, and I was able to split her, like Clark was able to split her in half. So I mean, into the two halves, the original Alley and the Bizarro Alley. So, but maybe it's kind of the same thing, that Superman's DNA is just too taxing on a human constitution, because their blood isn't naturally made for that, you know, because his blood is, it's in his DNA as a Kryptonian, but it'd be too much for the human body to absorb all that energy without it, you know, running them racket, you know. Like a great example would be like almost like the, oh God, was it like the Velocity 9 or whatever in The Flash? How non-speedsters like Trajectory ended up dying because it was too much for them to handle, because they weren't natural born speedsters. They were artificial speedsters. But, you know, it was too much for their body, and her body in her case. So I'm wondering if it's the same thing. And even Bruno's like, well, the guys working for Bruno is like, right, Henry Miller, it's like his body, you know, we'll keep him alive as long as possible, because if we keep going like this, he could die and we might not be able to resuscitate him again. But it's like, right, we're going to have to find someone else. So I'm assuming you'd have to go the meta-human route. But once again, there are metas in this to some extent, but we haven't really, I don't think they've ever really fully used the terminology meta, but it's like you'd have to find someone with a constitution that will allow them to survive like this blood injection and stuff like that. I don't know if it's like a full-blown blood transfusion throughout the entire body, because that's probably the only way, because it's, I mean, once again, maybe Superman's blood is literally attacking the blood cells in every human. That's why it's taking its toll. Who knows? We'll ultimately have to wait to see where all of this ends up taking us, because I'm curious, like, how Bruno plans, like, he wants to maybe monopolize that and help his community. It's like, right, we'll be able to have, like, we won't have to rely on Superman. We'll have our own squad in our community being able to protect people. Once again, it's kind of do some bad for the greater good type of situation. We'll have to wait and see how that plays out. Some other elements to the episode is the whole situation with Jonathan and Candace, because he hasn't told her about the Eliza thing, so things are kind of awkward there. Plus her dad, which we heard talks about her dad last season and stuff, but now it's like we get to meet him, and he's kind of off and weird. It's like, oh yeah, where'd you get that truck? He's like, oh yeah, it was kind of a gift. It's like, oh really? Well, be singing it, Johnny boy. Then later on, the truck gets missing, and he tells Candace about that, but she's like, oh, you think just because my dad, like, oh, we must be so poor, and he's like, no, I didn't mean it, and she was offended by it, because it's like, oh, you're just going to assume my dad did it. Ultimately, he did, but Jonathan also wanted to go about things without letting anyone know about that, because he didn't want to get the police involved, like, you know. That's also why he took the fall for, I mean, obviously he kind of goes out of his way for Candace, because he took the fall for her last season with the XK drugs and everything, so working with Jordan and Nat, they were able to get the vehicle back. You know, him holding his breath through the smoke as Nat and Jordan did their thing of taking everybody down, got away with the car. But it turns out it was her dad, because he had the watch that had Jonathan's name on it, because they all kind of engraved it. But for her, it's like, you are pretty perfect. She's like, I'm just gonna, It's like, right. You lost out on football. Basically, so many people in town kind of hated you for a while, especially the coach obviously still holds a grudge against you, as we saw from the pilot, because of you taking the fall from me. Now my dad ended up stealing from you, and we don't see her reaction, but we do know that Jonathan did end up telling Candace about the Eliza situation, so we'll see where things kind of go on that front. Some other drama complicated situations. There's the Lana of it all, where obviously Lana's very stressed out. She's got the mayorship, the recent attack on herself, plus she has a teenage daughter, which, hey, we can all admit teenagers suck, and you're just like, you know. And Lana ended up slapping Sarah. I mean, I'm not saying it's okay, because that's a larger conversation about, like, older generations being like, hey, it's like, that's how you dealt with children. You would beat them. And, but obviously that's been very frowned upon. And even the way Lana talks about it, it seems like she frowns upon it. It's not like she was like, oh, like Sarah deserves. It's like, no, I'm so sorry and then she said, like, my relationship with my mom. I was like, interesting. So it might be a thing of that's probably how her mom resolved everything. Was like, yeah, the back of the hand. Or the front of the hand, like her mom probably, who knows if it went like even further and was just full blown abuse, because that's abuse in the right of like, oh, it's discipline like that. I'm not trying to tell someone how they raise their child, but that is the conversation of like, it's probably a thing of it wasn't even just discipline when it came from Lana's mom. It might have just been straight up abuse. I know there's a larger conversation that can be had about just like disciplining your children, being in that borderline abuse lane, so. But Lois, Lana saying that made you go like, oh, like, because we hadn't really heard much about her upbringing so far in the show, and that really like broke her. That she's like, I don't want to be like my mom, and she's like, I'm sorry, and I don't know if Sarah heard it in that or she left before, because we don't know if she was still in the room when Lana was saying all that. You hope she heard it, but we don't know. She might have already like snuck out the house afterwards, or maybe she waited till her mom went in her room and then left, and we met up with her dad later. I mean, because once again, it's just like Lana's kind of snapping at everybody, because once again, it's like it's a lot that she has to deal with. Once again, she's going through a divorce. She finally signed the papers, mayorship, getting attacked, and especially because Kyle shows up later on asking questions like, because he's like, oh, I want to send the sheriff by and stuff like that. But it's like, no, don't worry about it. Like John Harry Irons helped out. It's like, oh, how does he know about tech and stuff like that? And Sarah's like, I don't know. I didn't look at his resume. It's like, right, your dad's still in the dark about all that. But he confronted Lana about it. He was kind of trying to like approach the conversation from a different lane. But then she was like, why are you all up in my business? You're so childish, like going about it. This one's like, yo, she kind of ripped him a new one. It is a thing of like, yeah, it is her business. Could have handled that conversation a little bit better, but also, once again, she is stressed out of her mind with everything going on. Plus, the attack, like, made more of an impact than she lets on. Just like Lois is kind of deflecting, like, Lana's kind of diving into work to kind of forget about it, because she's trying to focus on work. She's like, yeah, I'm so busy with work, I don't have time to really stress about that. But it is becoming a lot. But also, not justifying it, but Sarah shouldn't have said what she said, like, oh, no wonder dad cheated on you. It's like, you were, once again, teenagers don't realize how much of an asshole they are. I learned, like, in retrospect, I'm like, oh yeah, I was such an asshole as a teenager. You don't have that until you're older, being like, oh god, I suck. I mean, it also helps that I have teenage nieces and a nephew, and they are douchebags, and you're like, oh god, all teenagers suck. Like, when you're older and being able to see that outside perspective of like, oh god, was I like that as a teenager? Oh god, I can't believe my mom and dad had to deal with that. Teenagers are horrible. So like, it is that thing of like, once again, she's just super stressed, and that's a complicated thing. And obviously Chrissy and Kyle, they were sitting down talking to each other, and we learned about Kyle's dad's situation that, he understands the stubbornness that Lois has, because his dad had that same stubbornness and having to deal with it, because his dad died from, I think he said, liver cancer. So, and everything. He's kind of deal with the whole Lana of it all. And it was like, hey, let's go back to, Chrissy's like, come back to my place. We can watch a movie or something. He was down for that. But then the Sarah situation came up and you're like, you kind of feel bad because like for Chrissy, I think she kind of doesn't have anyone because like everyone else around her has someone at the very least. And so all she really has, I think, is work. And I think that's going to be a big part of her story this season potentially. So, or at least a small part of it to some extent. So, like I said, very heavy drama-filled episode. I'm really curious to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.